you. So, bonjour tout le monde. Je suis Pamela Eastfeld, la présidente de La PAS, and I welcome everyone to our monthly PAFSO breakfast. And this month we have the honor of having Alan Kessel with us, who just very recently retired from after 41 years with Global Affairs Canada. But before I get started, and turn over the floor to Alan to tell us about what he wished he'd known about his in his long career. I just would like to acknowledge that I am chairing this meeting from the unceded territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe people. That, I acknowledge them as the past, present, and future guardians and caretakers of these lands. And I encourage everyone, I know everyone's joining from different places, to just take a moment to think about the traditional guardians and caretakers of the lands that you're on and what that means for our lives today. Alan, I think you're okay if we do, we can do Q&A en anglais ou en français, uh,
Whichever.
whichever people are comfortable in. And so I think everyone that I see all the names on the webinar, I think these are all friends and people that are known to you, but I'll just for the recording for people who might come along later. Alan has been was our GAC's legal advisor since 2017 during some pretty exciting times. And this is the last assignment in a long career that spanned a whole number of assignments at Post and at headquarters in Stockholm, twice in London, in Geneva, mostly in the legal field, it looks like. And so he has a lot of insight and a lot of perspective, starting out as a PAFSO member and ending up as an ADM, which is a trajectory many people I think would like to figure out how to emulate, and providing fearless advice and faithful execution to the department and our political level. So I'm not gonna make a longer introduction because I think really we want to hear about your career from you. So what would you like to tell us?
Well, listen, thank you very much. And I do notice that Keith Lewis is on, and Keith will wonder where the hell is Alan. Keith, it's a backdrop I've got here, which I put on, which is one I used to use for work meetings, so that you don't have to really come into my house, because he's wondering, did the guy actually leave? Yes, I did leave. And it's good to see some other folks on here as well, who I've seen in the past and I know very well. So thank you very much for joining us this morning. Look, just a little bit of a background, and some of this will be known to some of you, but I'll just give you a bit of a background. I did an undergrad at the University of Waterloo in English and poli-sci, and then of course a lot of people who are trying to figure out where they're going to go. I went into law and did my law degree at Osgoode, and then practiced a couple of years in downtown Toronto, corporate commercial law, before I decided that there has to be another life, and ran away and joined the Foreign Service, and they dumped me straight into the legal branch when I came in 1983 as a baby FS, and since then, and you have gone through some of my career, but it's been sort of balanced in a way, because all of my postings have either been geographic, bilateral, or multilateral postings. So I have a full spectrum of the department. And in my career also, I've dealt with both the trade and the political side. Less so the development side, of course, that joined us later. Although I will admit that when I joined in 83, we had the four streams, which was political, trade, social affairs, which was immigration at the time, and aid. And FSs were in all of those places. And so we joined up as FSs from different parts of the government um, to do our cross Canada tour, which I think they brought back maybe, and also to work and study together. Now, of course, we're all grouped really, except for immigration, in one department. Um, Look, I mean, many of you have been around the Mulberry Bush. I don't need to talk to you as if you've just walked into the department. I don't see names that, Bob is there. Oh, Melanie's there, and Keith and Sandra Shira. It's great to see some of you. So I'm not talking about beginners here. Were you guys jumping in there?
I was just gonna say though, since we want to record this, I mean, if you do have advice for beginners, it would be very welcome because people will watch the session after. So,
Okay.
yeah.
Well, I think what I did find was very interesting is that there were so many um, who who thought they were running away from whatever career they had before. And I have said to them, no, you weren't running away, you're running to. Because some felt, okay, I didn't like what I was doing, and maybe I was a failure at what I was doing, and maybe I had to do something else. The reality is, you really took a risk joining Global Affairs, or External as it was when I was there. It's gone through 4 different names. And I think that's one of the biggest risks that people take, because you don't know what you're getting into. You're really getting into a very schizophrenic department. And I say schizophrenic in the best possible way, because if you have a job in Ottawa, it's one career. And when you're on post, it's a totally different career. And I think a lot of people who aren't rotational, who don't know, who haven't experienced it, haven't a clue that we are some of the most adaptable people ever, anywhere. We not only have to change our jobs every 3, 4, 5 years, but we also change countries and places, and how we deal with people, and the level of management experience that we get. And sometimes we were in a small group, and sometimes we were in a larger group, and sometimes we're in charge of Canada's foreign policy in a mission. So I think we're some of the most adaptable and incredible folks around. And we don't go out and toot our own horns, because it's seen a little bit as inappropriate. But I do want to remind ourselves that we went through an exam to get into this place, and we actually applied for the jobs that are there, and we actually did them and experienced them. And so when folks who are sitting nearby you and say, "Oh, you've got a great thing, why can't I do your job?" We'll say, "Well, apply, do that." So I'm a little bit of a conservative when it comes to the sense of what the FS career stream is about. And I'm very defensive of it. I was on PAFSO, as you know, and defended all of our issues there until I had to be bumped off when I moved into the EX category. But I was very much an adamant proponent of FS as a career, not just as a sort of a dilettante, stop in when you want to. But anyhow, I had the most amazing opportunities. I should just say one thing, because I'm going to forget it if I don't, is when I joined the department, the first file that I ever had, and I think Keith has heard this story before, is that the downing of Korean Airlines 007 over the Kamchatka Peninsula by the Soviets. And that was a large 747, and it had some Canadians on board. And my first file handed to me was, Alan, they've done this. We need to make a claim. This is now that I'm in the legal branch at that point. We need to make a claim. Please start working on it. Completely unheard of. Never experienced this stuff before. Because in law school, they don't teach you these things. They don't teach you about international law. And I can hear Keith and some others sniggering there. Melanie, stop it. The reality was that we are such a unique group of people, not only in the foreign policy development side, but on the legal side, that you have to develop it yourself and work within that framework. And as I was saying to colleagues, as I'm leaving the department, the last file I'm really dealing with and running on is the downing of Ukrainian Airlines PS 752, shot down by Iran over Tehran, and with the loss of 176 people. So there's a very interesting kind of circle of life. Everything old is new again, but in a different environment. In the meantime, you mentioned that these postings. So just to put it in perspective, my first posting was Stockholm. And I went in there sort of not aware of anything about this sort of stuff. First time into a mission. And it was the most formative experience. I think everybody who's online and knows that their first posting, it just sort of stays with you. Like it's this kind of iconic moment in your life. It didn't hurt that Sharon, who I had recently married and had joined me in Stockholm, and then we had our first child there. So we will always have a reminder, and some of you have had progeny born in other countries, that that's part of the life of the Foreign Service. But also, it was a momentous occasion because Olof Palme was assassinated during my posting. And I know that this is old history for some, but it was a real jolt for Swedes. And I got an opportunity to report on that. But not only that, learned Swedish. And like many of you, learned languages on posting. The second posting was Geneva, and that was a multilateral posting. Um, Flying over, apparently something was going crazy in Montreal. And when I landed, I was handed a file and said, "Oh, you have to go over to the UN right now and defend Canada's interests because something happened in a place called Oka, Kanasataki, Kanawaki, and we're being accused of genocide, and you need to go." And of course, what did I know about it? But adaptable, we've got our tool belt, right? And we go, and I did that and spent some very interesting moments being in the spotlight as a Canadian, being accused of some really horrible things when we knew that they were bogus. But you'd had to do it, and I did it. And also during that posting, really grew up as a person because it was the same time as the Rwanda situation and the Balkans falling apart. And Canada was very, very involved in how did we deal with the issues in the former Yugoslavia in terms of the legal side of things as well as the human policy side. And then the last two postings that I did were, spending 8 years in London, but in separate occasions during the Blair Brown years, and then during the the Cameron Brexit weird years, and being able to watch as these spectrums changed. And then coming back home, I usually ended up in legal, and it was a kind of family that I think we were very fortunate to have, the legal branch at the time. I know that there's a reorg and there's some differences going to be occurring, but I think the people in JLD and in JLT, who I worked with, will find that their work will continue, albeit with a different kind of configuration. That's just a kind of a quick sort of all. Happy to talk about any kind of the kind of lifestyle issues that come up when you're there with a family. I'm happy to talk about the issues that come up that you have to deal with as a public servant, and also just how we really need to think about where we fit into this process as FS. Because when I joined, FSs were the majority in the department, and there was a rare group of like non-rotational experts. And now I think we're very much a minority in the department, and the so-called experts, are looking at us as some kind of an effete group, which is kind of unfortunate. So I think there needs to be a cultural attention to that, and what does that mean, and how does that impact, and will that make a change in the future? But I'm going to stop waffling for a minute and let you jump in.
No, so those are great, great. Those are the things I wanted to bring up as well. I mean, I think, it disturbs me always when I hear people saying, oh, well, we need expertise. We need, not just generalists. And I mean, I've been fighting to try to articulate how foreign service skills are actually a kind of expertise on their own. There are not many people who have the networking skills, who have the capacity to be able to move from one environment to another the same way. I mean, I often, I use the example like a few years ago, I have no Spanish and I have no experience working in Latin America. But at one point they thought they were desperate for somebody to go to Caracas. And so personnel talked to me and said, well, if we need someone to go to Caracas for a few months to hold the fort, can you go? And we think you could do it. And I said, yeah, I could do it. I have enough experience as a political officer that I don't, I wouldn't have the same subject matter expertise, obviously, as someone else, but I know how to work a diplomatic network. I know how to identify experts and which contacts you need to make and who to liaise with at headquarters. So not very many people have that capacity. And I think it's something we undervalue and that we let be undervalued by the system. And, especially for FPDS, I think we're kind of, we used to say the concierge of the embassies. I mean, at least they got rid of the term GR for the political section. At least now it has a name that is a little bit more representative of what the team does, but why not political section? And if you don't have a good political section, you don't have a good embassy because nothing else is going to be able to function properly without that networking and that the image of, establishing Canada as a credible player in the place that you are and so on. So go
You
ahead.
actually said something which is so intuitive, you didn't even realize how important it is. And many of us who've had kids overseas and watch them function now as the global nomads the kids were. When we walk into a room, we stop for 10, 15 seconds and we do this kind of eye movement around the room. And in that, it's just 15 seconds, we can tell which groups are talking to each other, who do we need to focus on, what is going on there. We've done a complete scan, and it's so kind of subliminal these days. You can do it while walking and handing a canapé to somebody.
Yes.
I mean, in essence, it's a skill set that a lot of people do not have. And in fact, it's a honed skill because many of us, and I mean, Caitlin, I'm thinking of when you work in a multilateral environment and you're going to 3 receptions a night, and really you don't want to eat anything. You just want to find out what the various other delegations are up to. Your so-called like-minded, or the bloody-minded, or the folks who've got the Henkel knives out. Really, you want to do that, and that's a skill set that you can go in, do what you need to do, which is to touch base with the key players and also be seen. So that's it. You're not just seeing, you're being seen. And then you go off to the next place to show you have enough material to send back that report. It is because you do it so naturally, you forget how important it is. And you only realize when you see people who are totally unadept at it.
Who don't do. Ooh, yeah. And I worry a little bit. I mean, PAFSO's position on the whole return to the office thing is, listen, you guys are professionals, and your managers are professionals, and you are best placed to work out with your manager how best to get the job done, you know? But I'm a bit concerned when I see, things getting so insular and people not connecting in person, because when you go out on posting, you're going to need to really have those skills. And I know for myself, after a couple of years, at the height of the pandemic of being mostly from home, like had to I had to push myself, to start coming back out to events and to being comfortable in crowds and to remembering how to do that again. So I hope there's a way of sort of addressing some of those gaps.
There's even a more important personal and emotional thing. So, okay, I wasn't always an ADM. I was, FS1D, and I wandered those halls of Pearson, looking at these mucky mucks and thinking, oh my God, I can't even approach them, and I don't know what to ask, and what will they say if I say something stupid. If you're stuck at home on a computer, you'll never get the comfort level that you do when you're in the corridors. And I mean, Keith and Melanie know very well that my approach to management was MBWA, management by walking about. And what it does, and what I try to do, is lower the hierarchy, flatten it out, but also, after the first time when people went, oh, what does he want? My God, what have I done? They just realized that that's how I operated, and that they could ask me whatever they wanted, and in a way that you couldn't just go on a Teams call blind to your ADM and say, by the way, I have a question. One, I think it wouldn't work very well, but two, you wouldn't want to do that and show quasi ignorance. If you're just chatting, on the way from getting, heating your coffee in the microwave, or you wandering down the corridor and someone says hi, and you start talking, you learn such a lot. And you also get that level of comfort dealing with the management around you. Uh, and I think that's part of the coming back to the office. That's important, certainly for our group. Where I do think that one size doesn't fit all is that I think government should be looking at what skill sets we acquired during COVID,
Mm.
and how we all became sort of experts in technology. But not only experts in technology, we now know how to present ourselves on a screen. We now know how to engage and deliver messages. We also, there are some people who don't have to be in an office
No.
all the time, and I think the thing that we may lose is, if you say one size fits all, you tend to forget that maybe government should be adapting as the private sector is adapting. I've got both my daughters who work in tech and other stuff. One was with a company that doesn't have any bricks and mortar. The other one is with a company that had bricks and mortar and is now downsized to the point where they get their teams together every now and again to talk to each other. But so that's a different approach that the private sector is doing. What we've been doing is we're still focused on Office 2.0. We have this pandemic where, God forbid, you go near anybody, and then we kind of remove all the walls and tell everybody they have to sit in the same place. No, by the way, you don't have a desk. So there's a bit of a kind of a weird mixture of messages coming out, and I think certain members of the executive team were trying to get this aired better, but the edicts are coming straight out of the clerk's office and Treasury Board, and I don't think there was a lot of room for boutiquing. So where you can do the boutiquing is the degree to which managers in each of the branches can say, okay, from my perspective, yes, I can have someone who happens to be in Kelowna, or yes, I can have someone in Trois Pistoles, and that person is doing a particular job that doesn't require that they be sitting at a desk. Now, what do you lose? What do you gain? You lose that interaction. And if you're onboarding people, it's really tough. Onboarding is probably the most difficult part to do if you're going to say to folks, yes, you can work remotely. Because working remotely is not remotely working in that sense. So
Yeah.
I think you just have to be a lot more adaptable in this current world. Do I feel happier around the team? Absolutely. I'm hoping they feel happier around each other. And I'm seeing increasing numbers coming in, not just because they're required to be there those 3 days, but because there's an opportunity to share, and people are now going out for lunch together again, and people are, the cafeteria is a disaster, but hey, there's still, we're in the middle of somewhere in the Pearson building. But
Yeah.
the reality is it needs to be worked with, not simply put in a box. So that's just my thoughts on the return.
Yeah, yeah, no, I agree. Hey, we have a couple of linked questions from Caitlin. What's the thing in your career that you are most proud of? And then the other, after your long and impressive career, what's one thing that you didn't get a chance to do while you were in the Foreign Service that you wish you had had a chance to do?
Very interesting. Thank you, Caitlin. The $100 is coming to you. The, so, I mean, I've said this, and it's a tough question in the current environment. But so one of the things that I really felt was a crowning, a jewel in the crown, was hitting the Canadian delegation, developing the International Criminal Court, and that's something I started on in '95, and this thing came to fruition in '98. And it was one of those amazing leftover things from the Cold War, where after the Second World War, there was the never again principle, which was we will not have this again. We will hold people accountable. And we couldn't actually get there because of the Cold War happening. The Russians or the Soviets at the time, together with the Eastern Bloc, always blocked what we wanted to do, which was to create a supra organization. And what we ended up doing in the UN was coming up with separate tribunals, whether they be with Yugoslavia, whether they be with Rwanda, whether they be with Sierra Leone, you name it. But eventually, in '89, when the wall went down, people started thinking about it again. And I was fortunate enough to come at a point in '95 through '98 when we were developing this instrument. And in '98 in Rome, Canada ended up having to run a lot of the things because the Dutch chair of the meeting ended up being hospitalized for a medical ailment. And we had to bring in Philippe Kirsch, who was my former legal advisor in global affairs, and bring him in to run the meeting. And then suddenly the Canadian delegation became the organization of the chair, as well as running its own organization. And then you may recall that Lloyd Axworthy was a pretty impressive foreign minister. The only foreign minister I've ever seen who walks into a room and the room actually stops talking. I haven't seen many since then. But he was pushing this particular thing. So that was my crowning glory. And, there'd been some issues with that court going through its adolescence and where it is now today, which have kind of given me indigestion. The other part was, what do I miss? I was supposed to be head of mission in two missions. One was to Norway and one was to Germany. And in both cases, they got kiboshed before I actually could head over to Norway and head over to Germany. One, what is that little heart thing floating up there?
People are doing, yeah, could do a reaction, but I can't see. I don't know who that heart came from.
I don't know where that horse came from. Anyway, yeah. So in both cases, it was it was the Prime Minister's office that ended up kiboshing it. And when I lost the Oslo post, I did get a second kick at the can in London, and some would say, "Hey, that was not a bad booby prize," and I agree with you. The one to Germany, I was going to go, but then the Prime Minister decided to send Stéphane Dion. And that kind of kiboshed that. So there are highs and lows, but there's what's it called, swings and roundabouts. If I'd been in Oslo, I would never have had that second kick at the can in London, where as Deputy High Commissioner, I sort of presided over an amazing period in British history where they went from empire to umpire, and not a very good umpire, and then they became a small island state while I was there, leaving Europe. So hey, I'd rather be reporting on that than whether things were affordable in Norway. So I was pretty happy. The German thing, es kommt, es geht.
So folks, I see that we've got a couple questions there, but I'm just going to kind of sneak in my one in front of yours and segue in. What do you think? I mean, being losing out on a HOM assignment for a political appointee, I guess to a certain extent that's kind of the luck of the draw, right? Like that those things happen. And I'm sorry to hear about that. I see Bob said also, my sympathies. I mean, we all, that kind of thing definitely sucks. But I guess what I'm seeing lately is, even like at the public service level, like even when there are civil servants being appointed, to me, the criteria that people seem to be appointed on is basically like, does management like you? There doesn't seem to really be a merit process for these things. And I don't know, I mean, maybe I'm just being cynical because of where I'm sitting in PAFSO. And it's also hard when you hear about your friends losing out on something and they're upset, and it's like, we all think our friends are great at their jobs. You may not necessarily be able to tell right at the officer level or, at the other level. But as like from your perch as an ADM, what what does it take for people who do want to move up the ladder, who want those HOM assignments? Like, honestly, what does it take to be somebody who has that kind of a career path?
Well, I mean, I
I
think
know
that's a
it's a
tough
big
one.
question.
It is, and I think people on the line will probably have their own views. I think what I have seen change since I was um, a junior FS is that, in fact, it's become more open than less. There used to be sort of a very small group of folks who were consistently sent to places, and you used to have to be at a very senior level before you went out. And what I've noticed growing increasingly has been that you can be even at the FS3-4 level, and you could be put into a post. Granted, it's a smaller post, but you can be put in as a head of mission or a head of an office somewhere, which has given more experience to people. So I'm kind of two minds. Is there a greater political interest in positions than there used to be? There used to be some key ones which we knew. I mean, I don't know why it was, but Portugal, was always a political thing. I mean, I never understood it. People were sent to Portugal. Boston was always political, and maybe it was because sent someone from the Maritimes and the fisheries industry and stuff like that. Clearly, there was a mixture in terms of some of the key posts. London tended to be a mixture as well. So you would have a combination of political versus public service, and then the same was in in Washington. Um, I think Berlin and Bonn before that were not as much, um, but have changed. Where it has become uh, a reality is that there are more politicals being put in. And I worry that that is more a reflection on the political level, not feeling that we can do what we need to do, or that they feel that only a political individual can do what they need to do. But then I just look at what happened in China. And I mean, that was the worst possible. That was a train wreck, and it was a slow motion train wreck. And then they had to put the departmental people in to go and pull it out of the toilet, and we have, and now I think there's a good track record to just show how the departmental folks can really do it, and we can be political in the sense of um, make be pretty strong, but certain cultures um, uh, think that if you get someone who was a former cabinet minister, they're close to the prime minister, and therefore you have an in with them in a way, and that gives you greater access. Well, that's been shown in the breach as well. So I'm strongly of the view that it should be majority public service, but I am also aware that there are key positions which will always be political, and maybe that's the way it is, and we just have to go with it. Right now in Washington, we have a very interesting spot where Kirsten is of the public service, but is in this kind of strange, almost quasi-political role because she's now brought into cabinet meetings. She's brought into the prime minister's small circle to talk about key issues. So there's been this quasi transformation, and I don't think that's bad because it does show that we can do that. What that does for the individual's career, if they're too associated with one government, is another question. Because, come the revolution and maybe there's a change of government next year, the interesting thing will be to see whether those individuals are continue or don't continue.
Yeah, yeah, I think that's going to be really interesting. I mean, I also think some of the increase in political appointments is like for practical reasons because, the current government has is doing a lot more appointments by, almost fairly open competition, right? Like you can apply to be a senator. If there's a vacancy, like they take applications from the public now. Now I assume you're probably not going to get appointed unless, the government is comfortable with you. But, that never used to be open. Same with, crown corporations and things like that, that used to be the traditional, patronage appointments. They're not available now. And so really there not very many places that someone could be put.
So what
And
I can say to that is that I've worked under both.
Mhm.
And what it means is that we become sort of more like the American system, where the deputy head of mission becomes the person who runs a lot of the mission stuff and has to kind of guide the political appointee who really doesn't want to sit in CMM or doesn't really want to deal with like firing staff and really doesn't want to deal with the problems that come in. They want to deal with what they perceive or is this high level diplomacy stuff, which when you're at a post, it's like maybe 10% of the time. The rest of the time it's like grunt work and meeting people. And I have a expression which says that you can't cross a bridge that you've either never built or you've just blown up. So, and
Yeah.
those phone calls with foreign heads of government that our people feel they can just pick up the phone and talk to them. That's taken a lot of cultivating and behind the scenes maneuvering and the building of relationships and begging and other stuff for you to have that kind of access that is just assumed to happen. It just doesn't happen like that. I don't. So you are a different, and this is part of the schizophrenia thing again. Um, you're a different animal when you're working for a political appointee. Um,
Yeah.
and I've done that in London. Um, uh, and I have done it as an ADM in terms of relating to some of the political appointees, whether they be at Permney or whether they be in London again, or whether they be in other places. Um, you have to have that skill set which allows you to do it. And I think most of us have acquired that.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I've never worked for a political appointee, but just what I've seen and what I've heard from friends, what I would like to see, I mean, I think we have to accept that there is always going to be a certain number. Ideally, when the whole China thing was blowing up, people would ask PAFSO about what we thought, and Elon was, well, listen, the best preparation for a senior position is a series of, more junior positions of increasingly responsibility in that line, right? And it's much better to learn the hard lesson that, when you're on post, they might just be pretending to like you, when you're second or third secretary, then when you're, ambassador, major superpower country and finding out, you know, how much influence you do or don't have, like live in real time in front of the cameras. Um, but um, but yeah, but I always think that they should, whenever they do a political appointment, they should need to budget for two positions. The political appointee Hom and a deputy, an experienced deputy who will be able to take on those management functions. Because, we hear stories of people, especially when you're talking about appointments to, some of the smaller missions, where it would be an EX1 or an E2, and, the political Hom just refuses to do PMAs like for 3 years. I'm not dealing with that. Who steps up for that if there's no position designated to do that. um a lot of things can kind
The
of fall.
GO normally has stepped in the past if that's been a problem. I think you probably have seen that, what happens
Yes,
there.
but then again, then you have the problem that the people are doing work that's not really, the GO is not really in a position to evaluate. Like there's all kinds of problems associated with not having a manager managing on site. You know, and
So
I don't.
the other thing that I think is to be kept in mind, and I think management is thinking about it now, is you're not doing anybody a service to send them too inexperienced to be ahead of mission, no matter what size mission.
Mm.
You're actually dooming people to failure. And I agree with you. Coming through the system and then having reference points which you watched somebody do something when you were in a junior position helps. Just chucking people in, whether you're doing it for, perceived optics or equilibrium or whatever, actually is not a great thing. And we have seen, and you've probably seen it too in your position, is that sometimes we've had to, pull people out, or they just they have sort of head of missionitis, which is that these were really super folks when you knew them back at headquarters or went out for a coffee, but then they get a car and some and power, and then things go sort of slightly off the rails, and then you have a whole bunch of people who are impacted by that. So, yeah, I think younger folks and others should get more experience, but I would be also very cognizant that sometimes you send people to failure if they don't have enough.
Well, and more we are seeing the system recognizing that, right? We are hearing about people who are not being extended. I would hear these stories over the years and kind of roll my eyes and think, okay, well, hopefully people are, taking the recourse mechanisms that are available to them, but often, not much hope of anything actually happening. And the last few years, I've heard stories of people who have been pulled out or, not extended, and because of poor management behavior. Is that your cat?
I have a cat and she wants to go out, and I think
You can
she's got
probably
to
hear
go.
my pug snoring in the background too. So we've got the animals, cheering all of
Oh,
us.
listen, COVID gave everybody an insight into everybody's home, their animals, their kids, whether they're tidy, whether they're not. So it's really, we're beyond caring anymore. We're in that kind of, yeah, that's just life as we go.
Bob says, I am not a cat. I don't know if I believe you, Bob.
But listen, I'm willing to take on more questions if there are any out there. Happy
So there,
to.
we've got a couple. That Shira's asking, can you talk about the challenges and opportunities of moving around with a young and later not so young family? And then we'll ask you to talk about what's next for you. Uh,
Ah, okay. So I think the most understood reality in this kind of job is what impact it is on you as a person, on your relationships, on families, on kids, and the like, because you don't only end up in a foreign environment where you're unfamiliar with, but the question is, did your spouse get a job? In a world where two incomes are absolutely essential to make ends meet, there's kind of this presumption that they're only dealing with you, and that the whole spousal employment question is, something that you work out. Now, it's a little bit different from what it used to be when I first started, and sort of spouses were sort of decorative and expected to host dinners. We're now moved to a place where it's at least understood, uh, and that we made a point as a department to enter into reciprocal agreements with a whole collection of countries which allow for employment visas to be given to spouses. Of course, it comes along with some immunities issues, which we have to deal with as well. But it also is a question of, whose career is predominant, or whose career goes on hold, or what. That is a continuing subject of concern. Now, there's some really super stories. Sharon, my wife, was one of those amazing adaptable people who was in the teaching business and then evolved from teaching at UTS in Toronto to teaching in Ottawa to picking up other skills with respect to English as a foreign language, and getting herself into companies either in Sweden, or at one point was editing the in-flight magazine for Scandinavian Airlines. The things that you end up, the crazy thing is that you go to a posting and you go into an environment where everything's provided for you, and you work with Canadians doing things that Canadians do, but your spouses go in and they're the ones on the front line of all these new cultures and have to make their way even more in terms of developing the skills. And for them, it's a battle every day. Um, the the other part is, having children overseas. Um, we had our first child overseas, and that was an amazing experience because we happened to be in Sweden, and they were way advanced in terms of how they welcome babies into this world and how they treated pregnant couples. Um, and we were very, very happy with it. It's not always the same in other places. But what it also did was added a level of, functioning in a foreign environment without the support of your parents, without the incredible need. And, we're seeing that now with our grandchildren, that we need to be there more for our kids and available. And we were just off in the wilds of Sweden with no family, And at that point, we didn't have the amazing ability of getting on a line like this to have a video conference. Back then, Bell charged you like $8 a minute. You had to wait till 11 at night to get some rates, and so many people ended up doing, sending tapes and videos that they did themselves. So it's a very different environment. You were much more isolated than you are today. Having said that, having kids overseas, you don't realize the impact on the kids, which is some can be good and some can be bad. So when you talk to my kids, they sound like Canadians, they look like Canadians, but they come with a skill set that's totally beyond many of their peers. Like, foreign service kids can walk into a room full of people and engage in a conversation. It's none of this morose teenage thing where they look at the floor and they just can't wait to get out of the room, because they've been taught this is what you do. Fake it till you make it, and then you can go and have the pizza we've ordered for you in the kitchen. But you need to do that, and that skill set has served my kids very well in their careers. The other thing that we got was the education in a different and more private education, which is something that has been incredible. And one, it's really to give them a level of education that's not dissimilar to Canada, but also you can't just put kids into local schools in wherever and assume they're going to make it. You need to put them into a school that is going to give them the skill sets to move on. We were very fortunate in Switzerland. The kids went into French-speaking international school, and they've used that bilingual experience to further their careers in the sense that they became the fluent French speakers for Canadian, British, English-speaking companies. And that was a gift we gave them. If you ask them where they feel home is, it's tough. It's tough for them. They'll say home is with the family. Whereas many of you will say, oh, no, home's Kitchener-Waterloo or Winnipeg or, the Okanagan. They'll say home that's a difficult concept. We just have to say home is with the people we love. And that's interesting.
Yeah, no, thank you very much. That's, I think, yeah, you're echoing a lot of what I've heard from different people about the pluses and minuses. And I have a couple of friends who are foreign service kids, some who are in the foreign service and some who are not. And they're kind of split down the middle, like, yay, this was the best thing ever. Or, what were my parents thinking moving me around, at these different formative ages. And there doesn't seem to be any like, I can't identify from stories anything that the parents did in particular that could have that led to one outcome or another. It seems to be the sort of random mix of what your kid is like and what the circumstances are like. And I don't know. I mean, I don't have kids, so I may be overestimating, parental influence, but to me, it seems kind of random.
Well, first of all, each kid is an individual. But one of the things we found is that they hate you when you take them out of Canada, and they hate you when you leave the post and come back to Canada. There's a brief period in between where they adapt and they really love what they're doing, and then you're going to rip them out of their room, their friends, their this, their that, their other again. And And if you have if you have two or three kids or even more, and they're different ages, they're very different experiences for them. The younger ones are more, easily moved around. The ones who are like anywhere between 12, 15, whatever, are are difficult. And then the other issue is, how do you arrange to have them finish high school in one place as opposed to having 1 year left? We were lucky with one of our kids finished high school in London, and the other one had to come back to Nepean. And it was not an easy transition, because coming back into grade 12 when everybody else in that school has made their cliques and their friends and their stuff, it becomes a issue, social adaptation issue, not an intellectual issue, because both of the kids were intellectually terrific and did very well at school. But for kids at that age, it's all about groups and cliques and fitting in and not fitting in, and nasty this and nasty that. And believe me, we dealt with all the nasty this and that. Um, and if you talk to them, they'll say that those are the years that were the more difficult ones, was the where you ended high school.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Listen, we're coming up on 10 o'clock, so I would suggest maybe we could ask you the Bob's question about what's next for you. Are you going to take R&R? Do you have any projects that you're planning to do, or are you just going to
Yeah.
relax for a while and see
Well,
what
well,
happens?
well, for sure, I'm going to relax for a while, and it's not facetious, but I do say to people, I will never shop on a weekend again unless I absolutely have to. Someone said to me, "What are you going to be doing next week?" I said, "Well, on Tuesday at 11:37, I'll be in aisle 7 of Canadian Tire, where the elbow plumbing stuff is. I'll send you a picture, because I could never do that on a regular Tuesday." On other things, I think you don't sort of become a total hermit. I still am very much in my old habit of reading everything all the time, everywhere. And as I'm also burning off leave at the moment, I'm still connected to the department through my phone and my computer and the like, and they will only be handed in when I actually have to sign off the books. I'm also, there people have come out of the woodwork and said, "Look, do you want to do this, that, and the other?" Which I will consider, but I can't do certain things for a certain period beyond once you leave. And then the other thing is, people have advised, don't jump into anything, because you know I did 41 years in the department, but I also did 2 years downtown Toronto, and then I did another year in articles. So that's like 44 years. I think I'm entitled to just a wee bit of time to
Yeah,
say,
take the summer off at
I'm going
least.
to go gardening. I'm going to go pull out some weeds, and then figure out what the other intellectual pursuits are going to be. But will it be different? Oh, totally, completely.
Well, we know where you live now, right? For when we did know where you lived before, but now we really know where you live, and it
Yeah.
looks like you live in your office. But
Nah,
but I mean, I hope we might come back to you. I might come back to you for some advice on PAFSO stuff and some of the directions that we want to try to take PAFSO. I mean, next year is the 60th anniversary. And we're doing a book called the working title's Dip Notes. So we're going to put together um, the way I'm imagining it is kind of a big, like almost like a coffee table book with some art de papier, some interviews, current interviews with people, lots of photos to answer that question. And we keep getting people coming and saying, well, is there a book? Is there something that I could read or look at that tells me, really what is a foreign service officer? What do you do? What's the life like? What's the history? We want to kind of make a crack at that, and not an academic way, but also in a like a fairly serious way, so that there is something that we can point to. So I definitely would like to interview you for that one.
no
um
problem. And do remember, and you may want to look back, is I think Buddha Papier or some PAFSO did do a day in the life.
mhm.
And what we did is we chose one day, in whatever that day was, and then people sent in what they were doing, and it was a really great slice of what
Yeah.
our missions and headquarters were doing on that day, to just give a kind of a reality check on what FSs were doing.
what people actually do, exactly. I think we might revive that as a project, deliberately to go in the book. Um,
Hmm.
to include in the book. And we're gonna draw on the existing articles we have from Buddha Papier and reprint some of them and maybe with little updates, if we can get the writers to update what they submitted and so on. But yeah, I think it should be really fun. Um, what else was I going to say? So we're also doing like our strategic plan, and we're looking at the environment for PAFSO and what we should be worried about over the next 3 years. So I'd be curious, maybe as a last thing, what do you think we should be looking at? I mean, putting if you can put your PAFSO hat on after all these years and say, okay, what do you think PAFSO should be focusing on and concerned about over the next little while?
Well, I think, and I'm speaking now as a former PAFSO and a non-executive of the department anymore, but we were looking back at the day as to what was our leverage as one of the smallest unions in government, and whether there was an interest in joining up with another professional union. I think we were looking at PIPs at one point, and to see how do we ensure that we can get the maximum for our membership at the time, and also and that was at a time when you didn't have the overpreponderance of departmental staff being non-FS. And I think there's a growing. I mean, I just looked at some of the people going to getting head of mission training, and a number of ADMs who are going for the first time mission training, head of mission training. So we're in a different place now. It's almost become kind of a secret society. You can't sort of admit too much. But I think if you're looking at how does PAFSO have some more leverage, it may be useful to talk about who do you join up with and whether that would work. I think we discarded it at a certain point because it didn't make sense at that time, but maybe it needs to be looked at again,
Yeah,
as
I
to
mean,
whether just synergies are there, and that may be a helpful thing in terms of negotiating in future.
well, I mean, I don't think it's always I'm always, I may always hear differently from the membership, but there does seem to be a real feeling that, we need to keep our identity because we are really the only fully rotational group, right, in the Foreign Service. I mean, there are others who have some rotational members or people who do go out on posting and so on, but we're the ones who are committed to do this, who are required to do this. So things like the FSDs affect 100% of us.
Yeah,
Like
but
even
look at how much better the D&D rotational folks are treated. I think you may want to talk to some of the folks over there.
yeah,
Um,
yeah,
they, yes, granted, they're in different kinds of environments, but ours are hardship environments. No, we don't drive tanks, but we're the folks who are next to the tanks driving the tanks.
yeah,
Um, and they do have programs which go way beyond our FSDs, and our
yeah,
FSDs have been consistently being curtailed, in terms of one of the major areas where FSs and others are not going to post or turn it down at the end of the day is because their kids can't go into a school where the parents think that they need to be, and that's inhibiting our capacity to send folks to the States. People are saying, why can't we send the States? It's a non-hardship. Well, there are two parts to this. For me, hardship has always been what's inside the mission, not always what's outside the mission. But
hmm,
the other thing is, on the outside of the mission, if you just assume that your kids will go to a local school in Chicago, and it's not the school you want your kids to be in because of what's going on there between gangs and other stuff, then you don't want to go to Chicago, at a time when we need to have the best and the brightest going to these places. So what is the cost to government, stopping families putting their kids where they need to be? And that shouldn't be just run by the bureaucrats in our department or the group that looks at FSDs, because that's inhibiting us. Right now, the major problem is getting people to go to the States.
yeah,
And that's why you're seeing one-off assignments by folks who shouldn't be going. The
exactly.
one-off assignment thing is for people who want to go to dabble, and what we really need are the pros, and the pros need to be looked after.
And people
Um,
generally, people go to those places on a one-off assignment because, maybe they have family there, or, the spouse's company has headquarters there, or, they like the weather or whatever. And then they plan to come back to their assignment that they own. They don't need to necessarily do a great job in that assignment in the overseas abroad because they know they're going to go back,
well, some
right?
of them
Unless
have three cross postings, and they're not even rotational.
yeah.
So I think there's going to be pressure. There's going to be greater pressure on the rotational groups to say you're not the only ones who can do this. So which means that we should be doing an even better job. And not only that, but we need to protect that environment because there's huge pressure, as you remember from the non-rots, the whole issue with them being able to get these postings, and then how you treat them, how you don't treat them, and how upset they are. And I used to say, listen, I don't know any other department where you could complain that the guy sitting next to you is the job you want to do, and your senior management says, "Oh, sure, how can I help you do that?" They will say, "Well, if you wanted that job, there's a competition coming up. Go for it." And so
Yeah.
I think but that's a difference in the culture in global affairs, is that there
Mhm.
seems to be this openness to doing that. I'm not saying those people are bad. I'm just saying the FS chose a career path with a certain process, and sort of just being plunked in because you happen to be there is not how it worked for us. However, maybe I'm a dinosaur in a world that's waiting for this meteor to hit, and I don't know whether that's something that is of concern that should be of PAFSA. But I noticed we were very much over the hour, and people are starting to drop off. It's good to
Yes,
see Bob
but
there, and good to see a bunch of others who I do remember fondly. So good to see you, Sandra, Mark, Brian.
if it's okay with you, maybe I will say goodbye to the recording and stop the recording. If I, where is it? Stop the recording.